Bill, I think the number one way to start this program this afternoon is talk about the founding of the Farmers Cooperative Creamery in Clear Lake and Barron. I think we're going to be gearing a lot of our things today to the Clear Lake part of the operation, and we're 68 years old now? 1906.
That is correct, Abby.
How about the founding of the Farmers Cooperative Creamery?
Well, it was organized by a group of farmers who decided they needed a purpose for the creamery, and which I will read. It was written in the 50th anniversary book. The purpose of the creamery in 1906 remained the same today: to furnish the patrons the best possible market for their milk, and to return to the patron producer the greatest possible share of the market value of their product after processing. The processing has changed from the manufacture of butter made from farm-separated cream to the receiving and processing of whole milk into cream, butter, powder, cheese, and so forth, and the shipping of fluid milk, cream, and condensed products to far places all over the country. But that has not changed the basic purpose of the creamery: to process the patron's milk as economically as we can, return to him as much as possible of the consumer's dollar. That purpose has remained unchanged through the past 69 years and will remain unchanged through the years to come.
Mr. and Mrs. Monson, you have been these patrons that Bill's been talking about who have served and been served by the Farmers Cooperative Creamery back for many, many years. You personally started as a couple with the creamery in 1922, though your family was with the creamery long before that. Mr. Monson, what are your first recollections of your family's dealings with the Farmers Cooperative Creamery?
Well, it was way back in 1907. That's when our basement was built of the barn. And we was there 2-3 years before that, before the barn was built.
That you actually shipped milk in, Arvid. Your folks did before that.
All the while they shipped milk.
I see. What kind of a dairy operation did you have then, Mrs. Munson? In 1922?
Well, just plain stall barn, hand milked, and separated the cream. You carry the milk to the house and run the separator by hand, and then carry the milk back and feed it to the calves or the pigs, whichever it was, and take your cream in. There was no refrigeration, and none of the mechanism of today.
I see. At what point did you start shipping plain milk rather than having to separate it by yourself?
Oh, I don't know that.
It must have been about in 1929, I imagine, when the creamery converted to whole milk instead of cream. Right. Although we still did take in cream at that time, too. We took in both cream and milk, and I can't give you exactly what year it was that we discontinued the cream, but it must have been, probably 33, 34, along in there somewhere when we discontinued the cream.
Let's go back to some of the history again, Bill.
All right, actually the creamery had been running as a private enterprise by McLennan in Montana for some years. It had been a co-op to start with, or farmer-owned, and then they went broke, and McLennan, Montana took it over, and they ran it up until a group of farmers led by Tom Davis, who everybody I'm sure still remembers his name. They called a meeting of a group of farmers there. George Jones was elected as secretary, and a committee of 3, H.C. Johnson, Wilson Martin, who is Pink Martin's dad, and Tom Davis, they were selected to inquire the possibilities of purchasing the creamery. They held a second meeting on November 7th, and the committee reported that the creamery could be purchased for $3,900. And so then they worried something about the wastewater and stuff that went down across the P.K. Anderson farm at that time as to whether they should go into it or not, and found out it was okay. And then they decided to elect their regular officers. Tom Davis was elected president. George W. Jones was treasurer. H. Halverson, Al Ryder, Alfred Grant, John Jones, and H.O. Johnson were directors. And they were authorized to sell stock in the creamery at this time, or to hire someone to do it. They had a directors' meeting on November 24th, 1906, Al Ryder was elected secretary at this time, and Johnson was elected vice president. And motion was made to buy the old creamery for $3,900, and at the same time they hired Alan Carswell as the manager of the creamery. John Peterson, Vic's dad, who people will remember on Clear Lake, was elected as a director at that time. The first stockholders meeting was December 22nd, 1906, and they adopted the bylaws and made arrangements, and they paid $500 down on the building and agreed to pay the balance of the $3,900 on February of 1907, which they did. The owners at that time were very surprised to get their money. Actually, the cooperative then was organized not as a cooperative but as a company with $4,000 of capital stock, which they paid $3,900 out for the plant. I think some of the statistics of the first annual meeting are quite interesting, Evie. That year they took in 836,121 pounds of milk and 728,507 pounds of cream. Now, just to give you some comparison, in 1974, the creamery took in 271,806,000 pounds of milk and 3,999,000 pounds of cream. Really, you don't think we take cream from the producers anymore, but this is cream that is purchased from other plants. Then at the same time, in 1907 or 1906, the average price paid for butterfat was 27.3 cents a pound. In 1974, the average was $1.56 per pound. The total receipts in 1907 was $68,147, and in 1974 was $18,514,747. At that time, we had total assets of $4,000, or actually only $3,900 at that time. But in 1974, the total assets are $3,902,195. And this is just to say what we have done in these number of years. They had the second annual meeting in 1909. The free lunch was served at noon, and let's say that is still being done today. We never hold an annual meeting without a free lunch for the producers. They decided to buy the Reeve Creamery in February of 1909, the creamery and the house, so that you'd call that quite an expansion at that time. This is a cute one. The creamery manager was instructed at the directors' meeting April 19th, 1909, to have iron rings made for hitching horses at the creamery. This was necessary in those days. And I got to do a little bragging here too, Evie. In 1909, my dad was elected to the board of directors. Him and Ole Lean were from the Reeve area, and they were elected to the board of directors. In 1914, they decided to build a new building. Now, they had got along with this old building all these years until then. But in 1914, they decided to decided to build a new building. It wasn't finalized until February 2nd of 1915. They took the bids on May 26th, and Mr. Riddler of Amory was the low bidder for $11,267 for the creamery. That building is still there today, by the way.
Where is that building?
It's right where the creamery is. It's practically surrounded by the rest of the creamery.
That's what I wondered, if it was a separate building or if you just had been expanding in the same general area.
Right, we've been expanding in the same general area. Alan Carswell, who had been the manager for 13 years, resigned in February 1st of 1919 and was replaced by a Mr. Rivard. It says of Hempel, but as I knew him, he came from St. Croix Falls, but I'm not positive of which. He probably lived at Hempel and worked at St. Croix Falls at that time. Do you remember him, Mary and Arvid? Yes,
very well. Alan Carswell, too.
Yes, I'm sure you do.
Mm-hmm.
I do, too, even if he was there a few years before I went to work there. I think this is quite interesting in the history of the creamery, with the fact that Miss Minty Harmon was hired as secretary on December 17th, 1919. She served in that capacity, I believe it was for 21 years that she served in that capacity. She actually was elected to the board of directors on February 3rd of 1920. Farmers Co-op Creamery of Clear Lake, Wisconsin changed their name to, I should have said, the Farmers Creamery Company of Clear Lake changed their name to the Farmers Cooperative Creamery Company of Clear Lake in 1922. And let's see, Mr. Rivard resigned as manager that year too, and Albert Erickson was hired as manager. Then in 1929, they decided to go ahead and build a new building and equip for whole milk. Previous to this, it had been only cream that had been taken in at the plant. Although it said there was some milk delivered at that time, but I don't know how this worked. It wasn't there, of course. There was the contract let for the construction of that building, which is still there today, was for $19,882. Then E.D. Snell was hired as plant manager at a special meeting of the board of directors held December 9, 1929. Evidently, Mr. Rivard must have resigned about that time as the manager. A special meeting held October 5th, 1932, found the stockholders approving a motion to set up a farm strike. And something else to get another familiar name into the program, Walter Albertson was given permission to install a steam whistle on the creamery this year. And this whistle had to be blown at 8 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock at noon, and 6 o'clock at night. I can remember that so well because I used to have to do it when I was working there. In 1933, to get back to this farm strike, an annual meeting was routine, but on October 24th, 1933, representatives of the Farm Holiday Association met with the board, and the board voted to close the plants on Wednesday morning, October 25th, and to call a special meeting of the stockholders for October 26th. The special meeting approved the action of the board of directors and voted to close the creameries for a period of 5 days. Minnie Harmon resigned in 1941, and Charles E. Paulson replaced her as the manager of the plant. Elmer Billy had been hired back there in 1934, and he had resigned in 1941, and Arnold Elkin took his place and managed till 42, and Kenny Fox took over and managed until 61. Clarence Sandberg was elected secretary to succeed Charles E. Paulson on August 17, 1948. Yeah, it says the creamery was still growing, increased their capitalization from $400,000 to $500,000. And they burned the mortgage in 1950. And in 1953, they increased the capitalization from $500,000 to $800,000 in stock. Do I have time, Evie, to read this, or is it gone?
Just a short finish.
All right, we'll just include this in the last 50 years. As we look back over the past 50 years, it seems a long time, and as we look at the changes in the plant during those 50 years, it seems even longer. The boilers, Alan Carswell, the first manager, fed with cordwood, now fired with oil. The woodlots that furnished the cordwood have been cleared and now furnish pasture and forage for more cows. The iron rings and hitching rails that once served the teams of the patrons are gone, and trucks deliver the milk to the creamery. The acres that fed the horses now produce feed for more cows.
Thank you very much, Bill, for talking about the Farmers Cooperative Creamery. I want to get in one quick thing for you before we finish the program today. Tell us about the basket social on the 12th of April.
There will be an old-fashioned basket social with a lot of old-fashioned music. We're asking the gals all to bring a basket. And this will admit them and their husbands to the festivities. There will be a lot of old-fashioned music with Dana Yell. There's going to be a polka band, a young polka band there to give them modern polka music, and many other things of interest on this evening. And that's April 12th in the high school gymnasium.
Thank you very much. My guest today on Clear Lake in Review, Bill Barthman from the Farmers Cooperative Creamery in Clear Lake, and Arvid and Mary Monson, who have been 50-some years of producing for the Farmers Cooperative Creamery in Clear Lake. My thanks for being my guest today. This is Evie Nurbin reporting for this week's edition of Clear Lake in Review.